The evening mist descended upon the quiet streets of the American suburbs in 1977, when the familiar rhythm of Andrew Dalton Lee's life began to inexorably fall apart. According to declassified data from the Committee for State Security, behind this mundane name stood a professional intelligence officer, Andrei Vladimirovich Lisitsyn, whose fate became a vivid example of the tragic collision between calculated ideology and living human emotions. Investigators later established that the beginning of his end was rooted not in counterintelligence offices, but in the very fabric of his artificially created life, which over time became more real to him than distant reports to the center. His journey began in a specialized training center near Leningrad, where the future agent underwent a rigorous school of depersonalization. One of the key exercises that Andrei remembered for the rest of his life was the practice of complete emotional isolation in an aggressive environment. He was placed in a room fully simulating an American cafe, where actors playing local residents provoked him into spontaneous reactions, trying to knock him out of character. He had to maintain hours of idle conversation about baseball scores and the quality of apple pie, without allowing a single facial muscle to betray his true origin. The second exercise concerned the technical side of working with dead drops in a busy urban setting. Lisitsyn was forced to practice placing a container at the base of an old brick wall in a park, while simultaneously monitoring 3 training groups of hostile surveillance. He was taught to use natural movements, such as tying shoelaces or coughing, to hide the moment of the handoff. It was this ability to blend into the surroundings, to be unremarkable in the best sense of the word, that made him an ideal candidate for deep cover insertion into the United States of America. Having settled in California, Lisitsyn, now Andrew Dalton Lee, began the painstaking construction of his legend, which had to withstand any scrutiny by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He understood that the devil was in the details of everyday life, and therefore 3 specific elements of his routine became the foundation of his security. First, he became a regular participant in the local gardeners club, spending Saturday mornings discussing rose varieties and fertilizers with neighbors, which created a reputation for him as a peaceful and predictable commoner. Second, he never missed a preventive visit to the same family dentist for 8 years, understanding that a medical history is a vital confirmation of a person's reality in American society. Third, he volunteered to help at the school library where his children studied, which allowed him not only to make useful acquaintances in municipal circles, but also to have a legal reason to be in crowded places where it was easiest to perform visual signaling for his handlers. However, behind this facade of the perfect citizen lay a painful duality, which manifested most clearly one evening in their cozy living room. His spouse, Jennifer, asked him why he sometimes froze while looking out the window, as if he were waiting for someone she could not see. Andrew looked at her, feeling a screaming desire within him to confess everything, to tell her about his real family in Moscow and that their entire life together was a carefully constructed lie. He replied to her that he was simply worried about upcoming taxes and the state of their bank account, to which she softly placed her hand on his shoulder and said that they would always manage everything together as long as they loved each other. At that moment, Andrew realized that his imitation of love had turned into something frighteningly sincere, and this discovery became more dangerous for him than any surveillance. The active phase of his activity required a flawless mastery of information transfer methods, and one such operation involving the transfer of secret data from the defense industrial complex was forever etched in his memory. Preparation began a week before the appointed date, with the process of encoding data onto a special microfilm no larger than a fingernail. Lisitsyn spent several hours in his secret laboratory, hidden behind a false panel in the basement, using a special camera to reduce blueprints of new satellite communication systems. On the day of the transfer, he left the house 3 hours before the meeting to check the route for tails. He changed 3 buses, entered a large shopping center through one entrance, and exited through another, carefully watching the reflections in the store windows. His goal was an old Washington park, where a prearranged dead drop was located under the floor of an abandoned telephone booth. After ensuring there was no surveillance, he quickly placed a container disguised as a pack of cigarettes into the gap between the concrete base and the wooden flooring. 15 minutes later, in another part of the city, a brush pass contact took place with his handler, who operated under diplomatic cover of the Embassy of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Passing by a newsstand, Lisitsyn supposedly accidentally bumped into a man in a gray trench coat. At the moment of a brief shoulder contact, the handler whispered a code phrase that heavy rain was expected this evening, to which Lisitsyn replied that he always took an umbrella when the sky was overcast. This verbal verification confirmed the success of the drop and readiness for further actions, but it was at that very moment that Lisitsyn felt the cold breath of inevitable exposure. The collapse came suddenly when, due to a small error in the communications system, the Federal Bureau of Investigation began to show interest in his contacts in Mexico City. Having received an alarm signal through a hidden radio receiver disguised as an ordinary alarm clock, Lisitsyn realized he had only a few hours before his life would be destroyed forever. A torturous internal monologue unfolded in his head, where the voice of ideological duty to the Committee for State Security fought against the cry of a human heart that did not want to leave Jennifer and the children to the mercy of interrogations and public shame. He looked at his sleeping son and realized that his departure would be an inexplicable betrayal for the boy, one he would not be able to forgive for the rest of his life. However, his oath and the realization that his capture would lead to the exposure of the entire network of agents forced him to choose professional duty. The evacuation scene was planned as a complex, multi-stage operation, leaving no traces. Lisitsyn left a farewell note saying that he had to leave urgently on business and stepped out into the night. The first stage was an intercity bus to Philadelphia, where he changed into pre-prepared clothes of a different style and destroyed his American documents. From Philadelphia, he reached Mexico City using a forged passport of a Canadian citizen. In the Mexican capital, he spent 2 days in a safe house without going outside, while intelligence officers prepared his transfer. This was followed by an exhausting flight to Havana on a small private plane, and only after that, through a Cuban transit point, was he able to fly to Moscow. Every kilometer of this journey distanced him from the persona of Andrew Dalton Lee, but brought him closer to a void that could not be filled by any state awards. Upon his return to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Lisitsyn faced the fact that his feat remained anonymous and his personal life had been erased. The psychological price of his choice was colossal. He lived in the country he had defended, but it had become foreign to him, while his thoughts constantly returned to the house in California that he had betrayed. The long-term consequences for his American family were catastrophic. They became outcasts, not understanding who the man they loved really was. The question that remained unanswered is whether the secrets of the defense industrial complex he transferred were worth the silence that settled in his soul after his escape. Whether this choice was an act of supreme courage or the ultimate form of cowardice hidden under the mask of serving the fatherland. According to many analytical reports of the time, the case of Andrei Lisitsyn demonstrated that even the most perfect training by the Committee for State Security is incapable of completely suppressing the human need for genuine attachment, which ultimately becomes the Achilles heel of any illegal agent. His story reminds us that in the world of shadows and mirrors, the most expensive currency is not information, but the right to remain yourself next to those dear to you. Psychologists noted that in the final years of his life, he often visited parks resembling those he had seen in the United States of America, as if trying through visual similarity to regain at least a small part of the sincerity he had lost in the pursuit of ideological ghosts. This internal drama played out against the backdrop of the majestic silence of the state, which accepted his services but could not return his lost identity. To this day, intelligence researchers debate at what point an agent ceases to be a tool and becomes a human being again, and whether this transition is possible without the total destruction of the surrounding reality. Ultimately, the fate of Andrew Dalton Lee remains a testament to the fact that great historical shifts are always built on a foundation of broken human lives, where every grain of intelligence data is paid for with the tears of those left on the other side of the ocean, never knowing the truth. Every word in his reports was saturated with this invisible tension, turning dry lines of documents into a chronicle of personal catastrophe hidden behind the ceremonial facade of Soviet intelligence achievements. The eternal question of what exactly won on that cold January night, loyalty to the oath or the instinct for self-preservation, continues to echo in the archives as a mute reminder of the fragility of human nature in the face of the ruthless machine of state necessity.